own beers, and up until, I guess a week ago today, I actually was the CEO of Korkers, where I led the company, oh, I don't know, almost 6 years roughly. We were about a little over maybe $1.5 million at the time I took it over, had really little in the way of processes. It was what I considered to be a diamond in the rough, a really, really interesting technology, but the leadership at that time didn't really have any experience, couldn't scale the business out, didn't quite understand how to develop it into the marketplace. And so I was fortunate enough to get the opportunity to come in and bring other great folks around the business, design, sourcing, supply chain relationships, and so forth. And today, the business is many times the size it was when I got there. There are great processes in place. It's become a true leader in the niche category that it participates in, and it's got a tremendous opportunity going forward. So I couldn't be happier about having been a big part of that ride and handing the business off to Brian Cheney, who I have a lot of confidence in, who will continue to develop the business and the opportunities that exist for it. I'll be remaining on as a strategic advisor to the company going forward. So, you know, we got a great relationship, but frankly, the last couple of years, I've been serving dual masters. I've been the CEO of Korkers while we have raised money, formed, and are on the cusp of shipping to market now a line of products under our new company by the name of Portland Product Works, which is the licensee for the Woolrich brand in the category of slippers and footwear. It's been nothing short of just an extremely hectic, probably crazier than I could have ever anticipated period of my life, trying to run both companies simultaneously. One of them a pure startup, raising capital, doing some of the things people like Emma had mentioned earlier, getting others to do work for you, you know, all those things you have to do to operate at market level, but with obviously less than market level resources. And so I'm happy to say that Portland Products Works actually booked over $4.1 million in our first season of sales that will start shipping to retailers, including Urban Outfitters and Zappos and Nordstrom and Emma, for that matter. They're a Wild Things a customer as well. So it's been a very, very successful launch, and we've got a great team of people, and the future's extremely bright. So I couldn't be happier about that. Just by way of other sort of personal background matters, I've spent maybe a dozen years at Columbia Sportswear Company in a variety of roles. I'm an attorney, I'm a CPA. I came up in that company when it was very entrepreneurial by nature. It just wasn't a deep bench of folks. It was really the original crew, and the business was very successful. I was able to get involved in things like buying the Sorel brand and then subsequently running it, because honestly there was nobody else there to do it. And so I was fortunate in that regard. I raised my hand, and Boyle gave me the opportunity to get involved in that, and that was really where I started learning the nuts and bolts of the businesses that we're running today. So I later became the GM of Columbia's global footwear business and rounded out my experience from that perspective. So I came here today, I was asked maybe a month or so to fill one of the slots, and my first reaction was a little bit of reluctance, but mostly because I'm extremely busy, but I also recognize that there are a lot of either entrepreneurs or budding entrepreneurs or folks thinking about becoming entrepreneurs, but if you're thinking about it, you might not be one. So it's one of these sort of, it's like a disease kind of, it can be good, but it's not a choice. In any event, the School of Hard Knocks is the theme today, and I felt like my personal story would be a good and maybe uniquely qualified position from which to speak to the School of Hard Knocks and relate it back to my entrepreneurial experience. And instead of relating individual stories around the various businesses and the specific challenges and so forth, I really felt like one concept dominated my existence the last almost 20 years, frankly, and it was touched upon by others up here on the stage today, and that is really the power of perseverance. And so I wanted to speak to the entrepreneurs in the crowd today about that power of perseverance and how tapping into the power of perseverance can help you get through seemingly absolutely impossible scenarios. And if you haven't hit it already, you're going to hit walls that you just don't have any idea how you're going to get around. And so I'm going to give you some examples about, in my own background, how that has manifested itself, and yet I'm still here talking to you today. So as a starting point, let's see a show of hands for those of you that remember Rodney King. Everybody remember Rodney King? Okay, why is he asking this question? Well, it was on the day of the Rodney King riots in Los Angeles when I got arrested with 5 pounds of cocaine on a DEA sting at the Santa Anita Mall. And my life up to that point in time was, we'll leave out the gory details, but nothing short of Hollywood-esque sort of drug dealing existence, extreme addiction, intravenous drug use, and just rampant, and alcoholism, etc. It was a really screwed up world for me for a number of years since I dropped out of high school. And it took that day and my finding myself in the Los Angeles County Jail on the day of the Rodney King riots, which by the way is probably the worst day in the last 100 years to find yourself there. It took that day and that event to get me straightened out. But what it also did was it created some significant hurdles, right? And I didn't really even give as much credence to how high those walls were going to be until I faced some of these stories that I'm going to tell you about real quickly. I always felt like I was the guy that could overcome everything, and I still do to a certain extent. I think there's an optimism in me that has helped me to move forward and maintain that power of to overcome obstacles. But it was a hole that I dug for myself. Many of you are going to face challenges or have faced challenges that aren't self-imposed the way mine was, but nevertheless, a pretty significant hurdle to overcome. So let's talk about a few examples of how the power of perseverance has enabled me and can enable you to work through the challenges, any challenges that you face. Coming out of prison, I've done maybe 39 months at that point, and I had a lot of confidence. I was clean and sober, clear-minded, eager to get out and make my mark and do that stuff that I should have been doing 10 years prior. I've gotten some, maybe a couple of years of college education through Portland State's, proctoring program, correspondence college, I guess, classes. And I was really raring and ready to go. So I got out, enrolled in college. Somehow I managed to get an interview at Smith Barney. A gentleman by the name of Dean Morrell, who's a Portland guy here, some of you may know. I told him about my background. He said, "Don't worry about it, come on in." They liked me, they put me right to work. I worked that weekend, in fact. I was just so eager to make a mark and become the guy that I thought I could be. And maybe a week or so went by. The branch manager came back to me with Dean and asked and said, "Look, it's a little bit more of a challenge than we thought it might be. We're going to have to get you bonded if you're going to stick around here. So you have to tell us if you want to be in the Smith Barney organization and in the brokerage world for your career. If you do, we'll go to bat for you. If you don't, then maybe this isn't the right thing." Well, it took me no time at all to let them know that I wasn't intended on being in Smith Barney and the brokerage world for the rest of my life. That just wasn't what I knew I wanted to do. So I gave them their money back. I don't know why I did that exactly. Dean later wrote me a note, and anyways, it was an interesting backstory on that whole thing. But the reality is I found myself outside looking back in with now true despair, because it sunk in on me finally how difficult it was going to be. And I think that was probably the only day in the last 20 years, other than my grandfather's funeral, that I actually cried. I'm a pretty thick-skinned guy, and that was one of those deals where you just don't know how you're going to get through this. And I didn't know at that moment how that was going to happen. It was a very devastating blow to me, even more so than being busted and going to jail. So the power of perseverance. I somehow picked myself up. I walked through that. I'll save you a lot of the details in between there, but I found I found my way into Columbia Sportswear through a variety of engagements and a consulting gig that I was working on where they were my client. They offered me a position internally. I happily accepted, and I subsequently, or simultaneously I should say, enrolled in law school, just because I wasn't busy enough, I guess. I didn't even think about getting admitted to the bar at that time based on my background. For whatever reason, it didn't occur to me, or I was, again, optimistically thinking I would get through it somehow. Long story short, and after a number of 3 years at night school at Lewis and Clark and working at Columbia Sportswear, basically getting my law degree on Tim Boyle's airplane, because he and I would fly back and forth to meet with investors. He'd have a gin and tonic and go to sleep somewhere around Boise, and I would study towards or contracts or whatever it was, and we did that a lot of times, so I did literally get my law degree on his plane. I graduated law school, I passed the bar, and the Board of Bar Governors said, no, thank you, we don't want you to be a member of the bar. And this was pretty high profile, so not everybody knew my background at that time. I was running Sorrel at the time. It was a pretty sensitive period, and it was very stressful for me, stressful beyond belief. I couldn't even have imagined that a person could handle that kind of stress. I've probably doubled down on that by now, but the reality is it took a lot of perseverance for me to work my way through that. I didn't intend on being a lawyer or practicing law in the state of Oregon. I did want to ring the bell. I did want to get as far away from my past and my background as I possibly could. And I wanted to prove to myself and my kids later, that it could be done. And so we appealed it to the state Supreme Court, and through the help of a lawyer in town here, the general counsel at Stoll Reeves, Brad Tellum, who's an outstanding attorney, and significant amounts of dollars that I funded personally. I ended up winning a unanimous decision at the Supreme Court to be admitted to the state, to practice law in the state of Oregon. They now teach the case in law schools up and down the West Coast, and it made a difference for folks getting a second chance, basically, coming back from poor decision making or what have you. So again, the power of perseverance. I could have easily rolled into a ball and just skipped it and walked away from it. I probably couldn't live with myself, but the fact is that the perseverance is what carried the day in that regard. I see my 1 minute warning. I'm going to go over that, I can tell you that right now. The third story is more recent. And so again, we're 20 years past this history of mine, and a fair amount of, I guess, what we would all consider to be accomplishments by this time. Didn't seem like it should be even germane anymore, but I told you we wrote orders of about $4.1 million with the various retailers that I mentioned that will start shipping in late July, early August. But I had to finance that inventory. I don't have $2 million to buy the inventory in Asia. And no bank, unless there's bankers out here that want to talk afterwards, is going to finance that inventory for a startup company. So I had to turn to the purchase order finance world to figure this out. I'm a lawyer and CPA, but I'd never dealt with the purchase order finance world, so it was a brand new experience for me. I started out with every conversation that I went into explaining my background so that everybody was clear, when I've always done that. It's very transparent, there's no point in not being. However, and so I guess I was talking to sales guys is what it came down to on the front end of these deals, because I had a deal in hand and I had put it away a couple months ago thinking I can go solve all these other problems now, which I did until the phone rang at 3 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, on the front end of a 3-day weekend, mind you, and it was the pure purchase order finance guys calling, and the phone rang and I picked it up and I asked them if they were calling to offer me lower rates. They weren't. They told me that their underwriters wouldn't support the deal, and it took just seconds for it to kind of all come rushing back to me. I've got shareholders, employees, my kids, my investors. I don't know what I'm going to do at this point. This is 2 months ago, by the way. 3-day weekend. I said, thank you guys very much for your support, and I guess I'll talk to you later. And that was it. And I had nobody to talk to for those 3 days. There are shareholders of mine here sitting here today who haven't heard this story yet. So good news is we're in good shape. So it was a long weekend. I mean, I already hate 3-day weekends. There's nothing longer than a 3-day weekend as it is, as far as I'm concerned. But this was particularly painful because I was walking into the abyss. I had no idea how I was going to finance this business. I couldn't wait until Tuesday at 6 a.m. I just had no way to know how I was going to make it through the weekend, not knowing that this business was going to get off the ground. And we'd already had manufacturing underway and all the other things that I could describe, and that I'm sure you already can see clearly. What I'm talking about here, well, thanks to my wife and some talking and time we spent together working through the situation, I realized that this was an opportunity not to get wrapped around the axle, but to realize that we could actually probably end up in a better place than the one that we just found our way out of. And so I set retuned my mind to that perspective, and within 10 days' time, that's exactly what happened. We came out with a better financing package than the one that we got kicked out of just 10 days prior. And I think without the scar tissue and the experiences around the power of perseverance, I don't know how I would have been able to continue to carry forward with the courage and get the support of my wife and the other shareholders who by that time were aware of the situation. And the fact we did end up with a better situation, so we're thankful for that. But again, the power of perseverance, in my mind, is what carried the day in that regard. So, so that's really my message. I mean, there's a number of folks that talked today. They touched upon this concept of never giving up. I call it the power of perseverance. And as an entrepreneur, we see others that make things seemingly look pretty simple. Guys and gals that have made it. And, again, it looks like it's all kind of fallen together for them. But I can assure you that in every one of those situations and every one of those stories, they faced incredible challenges where they thought many times about shutting it down and going and getting a real job or doing something else with their lives. And without them persevering, they would have never gotten to the point where they were ultimately successful with their businesses. And so I just want to encourage the entrepreneurs in the crowd to keep that in mind as you're facing challenges. There's always a way through it. There's always a solution to every problem. And I think more importantly for this community and what I've enjoyed the last few years being an entrepreneur myself is the networking capability. I'm a little less familiar with OEN, but just in general, I find that other entrepreneurs love to support one another. And if you're an entrepreneur, please reach out and help other entrepreneurs with their journeys. And if you're not an entrepreneur and you're a service provider, give an hour of your time, give a month of your time if that's the case, because this is the economic engine that's going to help develop the city and the state and take care of all of our needs longer term. So we're all part of the same ecosystem here, and I just want to encourage everybody to help one another as we go through this. So thanks for your time, the power of perseverance, and have a great weekend.